Welcome once again to Easter eggs, where we are looking at the Easter event. We're counting down to Easter. We're trying to make some discoveries, maybe some prizes, some surprises, maybe some thoughts about Easter we haven't had before. In our last stretch of conversations, we've been talking about the disciples, the ones who ran, and the one who stayed. Today I want you to go to the hill of regret. Because while Jesus is climbing up the hill of Calvary, Judas, on the other hand, was climbing or had climbed another hill, a hill of regret. He walked it alone. It was a rock-strewn path that was loaded with shame and hurt and guilt. Its landscape was as barren as his soul. I think the thorns of remorse tore at his calves and ankles. I think the lips that had kissed the king were cracked with grief. In his shoulders, he bore a burden that bowed his back. That burden was his own failure. Why Judas betrayed Jesus really isn't important at this point in the story. Anger, greed, let's be honest, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Because what's happening is now he has failed, and there is regret. And for Judas in this moment, where we are in history at this moment, there is nowhere he can go. There's nothing he can do. There's no judge that he can go before and get forgiveness. I mean, if you think about it, think about your life, you think about it, if you were to have to give an account for all the things you did wrong, and you were to stand before a judge and you just plead your case and say, I'm sorry and I regret it, and I need to be forgiven these debts, to have a judge that would do that is nothing short of a miracle. And that's what we get when we have a relationship with Christ. See, when Jesus saves us, we are seen as clean. He has paid the price for our shortcomings. There's nothing that we've done that's held to our account. It is forgiven. It is moved as far as the east is from the west. We are forgiven. Judas has nowhere to go because Jesus is dead and he's not back from the tomb yet. And Judas didn't just run like the rest of the disciples. He had sold Jesus out. 30 pieces of silver. He sold him out. He turned him in. He had cut a deal, and now Jesus was dead, and there was nowhere to go. He couldn't go before Jesus. Jesus wasn't back from the tomb yet. And so forgiveness wasn't there. He could have run to the base of the cross. And that would have been an interesting exchange if you think about it. Because what did Jesus do to the thief that was on the other side of him? He said, today you'll be with me in paradise. But Judas didn't get there. Because Judas wasn't going to make it that far. Because Judas already knew that deep inside he had made a mistake and he could not undo his own mistake. He had let whatever emotion get away from him. And he was filled with regret. And there was nowhere to go. Judas is such a tragedy because he ends up in hell. And I often read his story and I think to myself, if you just hung on through the weekend, if you'd have just hung on for a couple more days, if you could have just made it for a few more days and had the opportunity to see Jesus again, what could have been? What could the story have been? What could have happened? See, I know that there are some people out there who read the Bible and they just go, Judas, he just couldn't do that because, he had betrayed the master. He never could find forgiveness for that. Why couldn't he? I mean, what is there about the Easter story and the idea of forgiveness that says that Judas couldn't be forgiven if he'd hung around? Bad choice of words. But at the end of the day, the regret was too much. And the hopelessness that caused Judas to end his life, as much as anything else, was brought on by the fact that he had nowhere to go. There was no source of relief. There was nowhere to go if you got to the top of the hill of regret. That is one of the great truths and surprising moments of Easter. Because we've all been there. We've all failed. We've all made mistakes. Some mistakes really, really bad. And yet, because of the Easter event, we always have a place to go. We have hope. We can find peace. We can find forgiveness. And Judas couldn't, because his regret was so great. The guilt was too much. The emotion was too raw. And he had nowhere to go. Hopelessness. Hopelessness on display. Sorrow. Tragedy. Pain. All of those things we see in the life in the last moments of Judas Iscariot, and we shake our heads because he's certainly the villain of the story. But what could have been had he just hung on for a little bit longer, gotten through the weekend, and had just remembered and embraced some of the things that Jesus said? We'll never know. He misses it. Don't you miss those moments. There's nothing that you'll ever do that's so bad that it will separate you from the love of God. And that is the great news of Easter. And one of the great surprises, that at your worst, Jesus is still at his best. I look forward to joining you next time as we continue our journey together.